In 1913, Argentina was one of the 10 richest countries in the world, wealthier per capita than France, wealthier than Germany, wealthier than Italy. Buenos Aires was called the Paris of South America. Its opera houses rivaled Europe's finest. Its cattle ranches fed the world. Its educated middle class was the envy of Latin America. There was even a saying, rich as an Argentine, because being Argentine meant being prosperous, cultured, modern, a citizen of a nation with a bright future. But something went catastrophically wrong. Today, over a century later, Argentina is not rich. It is poor. Its currency is worthless. Its inflation exceeds 140% per year. Over 40% of its population lives in poverty. And it has defaulted on its debts 9 times. 9 times in a century. More than any other country in modern history. What happened? How does a country go from the world's elite to economic disaster? And why, after 100 years of failure, does Argentina keep making the same mistakes? Because Argentina is not experiencing random crises. It is trapped in a cycle. A pattern that repeats every generation with such precision that you can predict the next collapse before it happens. This is the Wealth Records, where every video will change how you see money, history, and the systems controlling your life. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because Argentina's story is not just about one country, it is a warning about what happens when nations choose ideology over mathematics. If you're from Argentina or Latin America, do you see this cycle playing out? Drop a comment. We want to hear from people living through this. To understand why Argentina keeps collapsing, you need to understand what Argentina was and what it lost. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Argentina had everything a nation needed to succeed. Vast fertile land, the Pampas, some of the richest agricultural land on earth, natural resources, beef, wheat, minerals, a strategic location, access to Atlantic trade routes, and waves of European immigration. Italians, Spanish, Germans, British, educated, skilled workers who brought European knowledge and culture to South America. Argentina's government, for a time, respected property rights, encouraged foreign investment, built infrastructure, and stayed out of the way. The results were spectacular. By 1913, Argentina's GDP per capita was higher than that of France, Germany, and Italy. Buenos Aires had subways before Madrid. It had an opera house that rivaled Milan's La Scala. Argentine beef fed Britain. Argentine grain fed Europe. And Argentine bonds were considered among the safest investments in the world. Argentina was proof that a South American nation could join the ranks of the world's elite. And then it all fell apart. Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, but because Argentina chose a different path. A path that has led, with mathematical certainty, to collapse after collapse after collapse. The cycle begins. Perón and the birth of populism. The pattern that would define Argentina for the next century began in 1946. That was the year Juan Perón came to power. Perón was charismatic, a military officer who understood how to speak to the masses, and his message was simple and seductive. Argentina's wealth, he said, was being stolen by foreign capitalists and the Argentine elite. The solution was to take that wealth back, nationalize the industries, redistribute the profits, give power to the workers. It was called Peronism, and it was not quite socialism, not quite fascism. It was a uniquely Argentine blend of nationalism, populism, and economic intervention. And it sounded wonderful. Perón nationalized the railroads, the telephone companies, the ports. He raised wages, expanded pensions, guaranteed job security. He created a welfare state funded by taxing agricultural exports and printing money. And for a few years, it worked. Workers saw their incomes rise. The urban poor, Perón's base, celebrated him as a savior. His wife, Eva Perón, became an icon. But Perón's economic model had a fatal flaw. It was built on consuming wealth, not creating it. The agricultural sector, which generated Argentina's export income, was taxed heavily to fund urban wages and welfare. But when you tax the productive sector to subsidize the unproductive, productivity falls. Farmers produced less, investment dried up, and the wealth Perón was redistributing began to disappear. By the early 1950s, inflation was rising, the economy was stagnating, and Perón's popularity was fading. In 1955, a military coup overthrew him. Perón fled to Spain. But Peronism did not die. It became Argentina's political religion, a set of beliefs that would be resurrected again and again every time Argentina tried to reform. And every time it returned, it brought the same results. Short-term popularity, long-term disaster. Cycle 2, the 1970s and 1980s, hyperinflation arrives. For 2 decades after Perón's fall, Argentina oscillated between military governments and weak democracies. None could solve the structural problems Perón had created. By the 1970s, inflation was chronic. The peso was losing value every year, and political instability was extreme. In 1973, Perón returned from exile. He was elected president again, but he was old and sick. He died a year later. His third wife, Isabel Perón, became president. She was unqualified and ineffective. The economy spiraled. Inflation soared. Political violence exploded. In 1976, the military seized power again. The dictatorship that followed from 1976 to 1983 was brutal. Thousands disappeared. Political opponents were murdered. And economically, the dictatorship failed as badly as the Peronists. By the early 1980s, Argentina's debt was unsustainable. Inflation was out of control. And the military, after losing a disastrous war with Britain over the Falkland Islands, collapsed. Democracy returned in 1983, but the economy was in ruins, and the worst was yet to come. In 1989, Argentina experienced hyperinflation. Prices rose over 3,000% in a single year. Supermarkets changed prices multiple times per day. Workers were paid weekly because their wages lost value by the hour. Savings evaporated. The middle class was destroyed. Riots erupted. The government fell. Argentina was in freefall, and the pattern was clear. Populism, inflation, crisis, reform attempt, return to populism, repeat. Cycle 3, the 1990s, temporary stability and catastrophic collapse. In 1991, a new president, Carlos Menem, took a radical step. He pegged the Argentine peso to the US dollar. 1 peso would equal $1, forever, backed by law. It was called the convertibility plan, and it worked. At first, inflation, which had been running at thousands of percent per year, dropped to single digits. Foreign investment poured in. The economy grew. Privatizations brought in revenue. Argentina looked like it had finally broken the cycle. But the convertibility plan had a fatal flaw. Argentina's peso was tied to the dollar. But Argentina's government kept spending like before. Budget deficits continued. Debt accumulated. And when the economy slowed, Argentina could not devalue its currency to regain competitiveness. It was trapped. By the late 1990s, Argentina was in recession. Unemployment rose, tax revenues fell, and the government, unable to print money because of the dollar peg, borrowed more and more. By 2001, the debt was unsustainable. Investors lost confidence, bank runs began. Argentines, fearing their pesos would be devalued or seized, rushed to withdraw their savings. The government responded by freezing bank accounts. Ordinary Argentines woke up to find their money locked inside banks they could not access. The anger was explosive. Riots erupted across Buenos Aires. The president resigned. His replacement resigned days later. Argentina went through 5 presidents in 2 weeks. And in December 2001, Argentina defaulted on over $100 billion in debt, the largest sovereign default in history at that time. The peso, which had been pegged at 1-to-1 with the dollar, collapsed. It fell to 4 pesos per dollar, then 5. Savings held in pesos lost 75% of their value overnight. The middle class, again, was obliterated. And Argentina, again, was in crisis. The pattern had repeated. Cycle 4, the Kirchner era, neo-Peronism returns. In 2003, Nestor Kirchner became president. He was a Peronist, and he governed like one. Kirchner rejected IMF oversight. He renegotiated Argentina's defaulted debt on terms favorable to Argentina and punishing to creditors. He imposed price controls. He nationalized industries, including the pension system and YPF, the national oil company. He subsidized energy, transportation, and food. And he funded it all by taxing agricultural exports, and when that wasn't enough, by printing money. For a while, it looked like it was working. Commodity prices were high. Argentina's soy and beef exports brought in revenue. Economic growth returned, unemployment fell, and Kirchner, and later his wife, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, who succeeded him as president, were celebrated. But underneath, the same problems were building. Price controls created shortages. Inflation, officially reported as low, was actually much higher. The government manipulated statistics to hide the truth. Businesses, facing price controls and export taxes, stopped investing. And Argentines, fearing their pesos would lose value, began buying dollars. But the government, running out of dollars, imposed currency controls. Argentines were limited in how many dollars they could legally buy. A black market emerged, the blue dollar, a parallel exchange rate where pesos traded at half their official value. The government was creating the same distortions, the same controls, the same inflation that had destroyed Argentina before. And once again, the cycle was repeating. Cycle 5, Macri's reform attempt and return to crisis. In 2015, Mauricio Macri, a pro-market businessman, was elected president. He promised to break the cycle. He lifted currency controls. He removed export taxes. He negotiated with international creditors. He brought Argentina back into global markets. And for a brief moment, it seemed like Argentina might finally choose reform over populism. But Macri faced the same problem every reformer in Argentina faces. The Peronists still controlled Congress. The unions opposed him. And the Argentine public, after decades of subsidies and price controls, was not willing to accept the pain of adjustment. Macri's reforms were gradual, too gradual. Inflation remained high, the peso weakened. And in 2018, a currency crisis forced Macri to turn to the IMF for a $57 billion bailout, the largest in IMF history. The IMF loan came with conditions: spending cuts, fiscal discipline, austerity, and the Argentine public rejected it. In 2019, Macri lost the election to Alberto Fernandez, a Peronist. The cycle had returned. Again, cycle 6. Fernandez, COVID, and the collapse into Milei. Alberto Fernandez governed as a Peronist. He increased spending, he imposed price controls, he printed money, and then COVID hit. Argentina's economy collapsed. Fernandez responded by printing even more. The peso, already weak, became worthless. Inflation, which had been around 50% per year, accelerated to over 100%, then 140%. Poverty, which had been falling during Macri's presidency, surged past 40%. And Argentines, exhausted by a century of failure, turned to the most radical option they had ever seen: Javier Milei, a libertarian economist who campaigned with a chainsaw. Literally, he promised to chainsaw the size of the state, to dollarize the economy, replacing the peso with the US dollar, to eliminate the central bank, to fire tens of thousands of government employees, to deregulate everything, to end the cycle. In 2023, Milei won, and now Argentina is conducting the most radical economic experiment in modern history. Can a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist president finally break a 100-year cycle? Or will he fail and the cycle continue? The answer is not yet clear, but history suggests skepticism. Why the cycle never breaks. So why does Argentina keep repeating this pattern? Why, after 9 defaults, after hyperinflation, after decades of poverty, does Argentina keep making the same choices? The answer is not stupidity. It is incentives and institutions. Argentina's political system rewards populism. Peronism, in all its forms, promises immediate benefits, higher wages, more subsidies, nationalized industries. And the costs, inflation, debt, eventual collapse come later. Often years later, after the politician who made the promises is out of office. So every generation of politicians faces the same choice: implement painful reforms that will cost you the next election, or promise free things, win the election, and let the next government deal with the consequences. The rational political choice over and over is populism, and the public enables it. Because Argentines, like people everywhere, prefer short-term gain over long-term pain. They vote for the candidate who promises to raise their wages and lower their costs, even if that candidate is printing money to do it, even if that candidate's policies will cause inflation, even if history shows the pattern always ends in collapse. They vote for it anyway, because the collapse feels distant and the promises feel immediate. This is the tragedy of democracy without institutional constraints, without a constitution that limits government power, without independent courts that protect property rights, without a culture that values long-term thinking over short-term gratification. Argentina has elections, but it does not have the institutions that make democracy sustainable. And so it cycles. Populism, inflation, crisis, reform. Populism again. Milei's experiment. Can it work? Javier Milei is trying something Argentina has never tried: radical, immediate structural reform. He is cutting government spending by a third. He is eliminating entire ministries. He is firing tens of thousands of government workers. He is deregulating industries. He is trying to dollarize the economy, eliminating the peso and the central bank entirely. And in the short term, it is working. Inflation, which was 25% per month when he took office, has fallen to single digits. The budget deficit has turned into a surplus. Foreign investment is cautiously returning. But the pain is severe. Unemployment is rising. Poverty is increasing. And the Peronists, still powerful in Congress and the unions, are resisting. The question is whether Milei can sustain the reforms long enough for them to work, or whether the political backlash will force him out and Argentina will return, once again, to the cycle. History suggests pessimism, because Argentina has tried reform before, in the 1990s with Menem, in the 2010s with Macri. And every time the Peronists returned, every time the cycle restarted. Milei's advantage is that he is more radical than any predecessor. He is not trying to reform Peronism, he is trying to destroy it. But that also makes him more vulnerable, because if he fails, if the economy does not recover before the next election, the backlash will be severe, and the Peronists will return stronger than ever. The lesson of Argentina. Argentina's story is not unique. It is a warning, a demonstration of what happens when nations choose populism over economics, when they print money instead of creating wealth, when they promise everything and deliver collapse. Venezuela followed the same path. Zimbabwe, Turkey, Lebanon. The details differ, but the pattern is identical. Promise redistribution. Print money. Destroy the currency. Collapse. Argentina has been running this script for 100 years, 9 defaults, countless currency crises, generations of poverty, and it still has not learned. Because the incentives that drive the cycle are stronger than the memory of past failures. Politicians still win by promising free things. Voters still choose the candidate who offers them subsidies today over the one who warns about costs tomorrow. And the cycle continues. Milei represents Argentina's last best chance to break it. If he succeeds, Argentina could finally escape the trap. If he fails, the cycle will continue, and Argentina will collapse again and again and again. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand